To start, there is no official way to pronounce the lightsaber forms. The geeks you've been hearing say it over the past few years have just been making educated guesses. Within the novelizations of Revenge of the Sith or maybe the Darth Bane trilogy, in the audiobooks we've gotten some pronunciations, but they have been inconsistent, and there hasn't really been any foundation for the pronunciations up until this point. So today I want to go over how I pronounce the lightsaber forms and the reasons I have behind them, giving evidence to real life language and basically how I deduced how they probably would sound based on the way they're spelled. Too long, did not watch. If you don't want to see my whole explanation, you just want to get the pronunciations really quick, that's the reason why you clicked on the video, go ahead and skip to this time code here. Otherwise, stick around and watch the rest of the video. First, I want to establish how I'll be working with these terms. Most of the lightsaber forms come to me as being influenced by Japanese. Even the word Jedi was crafted by George Lucas by way of the Japanese word jidaikeki, meaning samurai period drama. If you say Jedi and samurai close together, you'll start hearing the influence. Jedi, samurai, Jedi, samurai, Jedi, samurai. You get the point. The only thing that might come off strange is within the spelling of Jedi itself. As it's spelled now, it should be pronounced as something as Jedi, if we're keeping to the vowels of Japanese. In Japanese, the long I is denoted by the vowels A and I. That's how you get the sounds of something like KUDASAI, meaning please as a request, or GOZAIMASU, which roughly translates to a polite use of am, is, or are, or simply the word I, which simply means love. Yet Jedi is missing this appendage. Funny enough, the original Jedi within the Legends continuity spelled Jedi, Jedi, which solidifies the original notion, though the addition of the second I would make it sound like kawaii, meaning cute, which would make it sound like Jedi. Also, it's an interesting nod to the in-universe etymology of the word, and how it might have evolved over time like words do in real life. But when it comes to the Jedi, and how they might pronounce their words, I feel it's safe to say that Japanese is a strong influence, though there might be exceptions, which I'll get into later. So first we have what can be pronounced as shii-cho and shii-cho. In Japanese we have an almost direct translation. The number 4 in the language is pronounced shi. But again, like with the original Jedi example, we have that double I situation going on, similar with the word kawaii. I was told by my Japanese speaking friend that these are technically supposed to be different sounds, but to my American ear, they sound about the same. By the way, shoutouts to Jesse. In either case, I would say this lightsaber style will be pronounced as shii-cho. This word doesn't have a lot of contention. The only difference I've ever seen amongst people is the intonation. The difference between MAKASHI or MAKASHI. For me, I go with the former, splitting each syllable distinctly like MAKASHI, or actually saying it normally, MAKASHI. For the longest time, I pronounced this word as so-ri-su, but I have recently changed over to so-re-su. The reason for this is because within the Japanese vowel system, the sound E, as it's spelled, would take on the softer sound of E, rather than its vowel sound, E. For example, in the phrase arigato, meaning thank you, the vowel of E is denoted by the letter I. So if soresu would have the vowel sound of E, it would be spelled as so-ri-su, rather than so-re-su. But taking it a step further, after showing my breakdown to one of my Japanese-speaking friends, by the way, shoutouts to AJ, he told me that the last U would be dropped altogether, similar to the words DESU, MESU, or GOZAIMASU. This also occurs with the name Sasuke, or Asuka, so that would mean that soresu would actually be sores. In Japanese, there are sometimes voiceless vowels, and to help explain this, I turned to this video from JapanesePod101.com.
Why do DESU and MASU sound like des and mas? When you say these words, you actually pronounce the vowel u, but the vocal cords don't vibrate enough, and you can't hear the sound u well. This rule also applies to mas form of verbs such as tabemasu, meaning to eat, mimasu, meaning to watch. Another example word with a voiceless u in the middle is sukiyaki, which is the name of famous Japanese food.
The S is not entirely silent, but it trails off to the point where it disappears in the Japanese language. However, certain Japanese dialects do emphasize the U. For example, those in and around Kyoto can sometimes be heard saying DESU instead of des, whereas in Tokyo, it's more common to have the U taper off. So the U is not completely silent, but it does trail off to the point where it disappears in the Japanese language. So, in this case, I would say the third form of lightsaber combat potentially has two pronunciations based on dialect, with soresu or sores. This is another one without a lot of contention, unless you were to read the Revenge of the Sith novelization, where the form is incorrectly spelled as Ataro. For this reason, some folks pronounce the word as Ataro, versus the more common use of Ataru. I couldn't find anything to support the sound of U taking on the vowel sound of O in any context, Japanese or otherwise. So for me, the pronunciation remains Ataru. Form 5 lightsaber combat is split between a discipline dedicated to blaster redirection and a discipline of direct saber-to-saber combat. Our first term, shii-in, comes with little debate. It adheres to Japanese vowels with the I taking on the vowel sound of E and the E taking on its softer sound. The second variant of the fifth form is where debate tends to arise. The two ways it's been pronounced is Djem So or Djem So. Now for this form, we can't turn to Japanese because there is no instance in the Japanese language that puts a D and a J next to one another like this, which I find interesting. When it comes to all the classic forms, they all take on the Japanese vowel sounds, but when it comes to Form 5 and then Form 7, which I'll get into later, each of the variants take on different voices. So how do we pronounce the D and the J? Well, I know at least one person who can give us insight into that.
What's your name?
Django.
Can you spell it?
D-J-A-N-G-O. The D is silent.
But why is the D silent? Does it only occur in Django's name? Well, no. We also see this occur with the name Djokovic from Serbia, or the name Joser from Egypt, or the name Jose from the temple in Final Fantasy X. From what I can tell, this odd pairing of D and J seems to occur within the transfer from Latin, as used by Latin people, to Cyrillic, as used by Slavic people. In Latin, if I'm not mistaken, the J sound is formed by this symbol, which put simply looks like a D with a little line through the middle. But somewhere in history that accent mark dropped off, and to convey the pronunciation someone stuck a J after it, hence the reason why we have certain words and names that start with D and J. It's a similar phenomenon that has happened with other words such as Americans dropping the H in schedule, or dropping the K and the GH in night, or dropping the W in sword. In the lore of Star Wars, it feels like the difference in the word stems from someone bringing the technique from somewhere else into the classic discipline. Not only did Djem So bring a new way to implement the fifth form of saber combat, but it also brought with it a new way to say it as well. Now, from what world or region it comes from is unclear, but there may be an answer out there somewhere. But it is cool that the variation comes from a more European background, which could be equated to Djem So's approximation with European longsword fencing. Whoa, now I kind of see why linguists are so important for mapping out history and timelines of history. God, I'm a nerd. Maybe I should be making videos about real history instead of imaginary stuff. Nah. But yeah, that's how I pronounce the two versions of the form, shii-in and Djem So. Now going back to something a bit more simple. This form does have debate as well, but I can explain the difference between the two more directly. The two ways people pronounce this form is either NIMAN or NIMAN. Again, I go with the idea of Japanese vowels, which is why I tend to go with the first pronunciation. In the same way one would say Nippon or Nihon, depending on dialect, which means Japan, is the same way I take the beginning of Niman. To me, if Niman was meant to be spoken with a more active I, it would be spelled as Naiman instead of Niman. And when it comes to the second half of the word, man, I take the Japanese vowel of A as it appears in the name Mako, therefore the softer A for Niman. Funny enough, the difference of the sound A occurs in my own name. In American English, we tend to use a more active A sound, which results in Antoine, as opposed to the French who speak it with a softer tone, which results in Antoine. With all that considered, that's how I came to settle on the sound of NIMAN. And finally, we have the last forms. Hooray! Similar to Form 5, there are two variants. The first is pretty straightforward with Juyo, which adheres to Japanese vowels, but the second is a bit more tricky in the same way that Djem So was. I've gone through several versions of this word, and there are many variances on its sound, from vapad, vapad, vapod, and I've even heard one guy refer to it as vapid. Unfortunately, I don't see these terms having any relation to Japanese, in the same way vapod was not originally part of the classic forms of lightsaber combat in the lore of Star Wars. So my breakdown of this word has to adapt and change like the form itself. I turn to greetings like salam, or names like Kwanzaa, or terms like bazaar, which makes va the most likely sound. And when it comes to the second half of the word, I have no good reasoning or explanation for it. For me, it flows better to say pod instead of pad. So that's what I go with, but it could very well be wrong. But as it stands, I pronounce it as vapod. This one isn't part of the classic lightsaber forms, it is merely a supplement to any of the forms, as it simply means dual blade fencing. This one is really easy. I've never heard anyone pronounce it differently. It has always been pronounced, as far as I am concerned, Jar Kai. Similar to what we have with KUDASAI, the second half of Jar Kai isn't pronounced with the vowel A, but with the vowel sound of I, hence Jar Kai. But that's it. That's how I pronounce the lightsaber forms. If you're coming from the beginning of the video, if you want to get a review, or if you've been watching throughout the entire video and you just want a breakdown of all the forms back to back, here are my pronunciations. Form 1, shii-cho. Form 2, MAKASHI. Form 3, Soresu or Sores, depending on what dialect you use. Form 4, Ataru. Form 5, Shien and Djem So. Form 6, NIMAN. Form 7, Juyo and Vapod. And the bonus round, Jar Kai. If you're scratching your head right now and going, how is he pronouncing those based on what he just said? You probably should go watch the rest of the video and see my explanations. Otherwise, you would know what's going on. Otherwise, let me know how you pronounce these terms and if you agree with my own assessment in the comments below. And as always, peace, love, and may the Force be with you. Always.